Hello, 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 and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. We are joined by, of course, the lovely Amy Hollenkamp, RD, but also, who do we have here? We are joined this week by our new friend and celiac expert. So Tayler Silfverduk is a registered dietitian also. I'm feeling a little outnumbered right now, but that's okay. And I actually creeped on her and I lured her onto the podcast for you guys. I'm so proud of myself. I found her on Instagram and I was like, man, this girl knows what she's talking about. She seems legit. I like her. And I've been creeping on you for a couple of months. And then finally, I got up the courage to ask her to be on the podcast. So if you want to follow Tayler on the Instagram, her handle is Celiac Dietitian. All one word, no underscores, no nothing else. So pretty straightforward handle on Instagram. But welcome, Tayler.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Again, now that I revealed myself as a creepy creeper.
You're
like hashtag regret. Yeah, look at that. Isn't the internet a weird place to live? But let's get right into celiac disease. And I think that most likely a lot of our listeners they've become familiar with celiac disease to a point. Maybe they've been evaluated for it. I think a lot of people wind up with the irritable bowel syndrome diagnosis after the other stuff is excluded, right? Like, all right, you don't have Crohn's, you don't have colitis, you don't have celiac disease. Therefore, you have an irritable bowel. Duh. And you're kind of left with that nothing burger of a diagnosis. So I imagine some people have gotten some manner of evaluation, but I definitely want to talk about signs and symptoms of celiac disease, complications of celiac disease, particularly if it's not managed well, and talking about like what our listeners maybe should think about, like, okay, maybe they've only had like the celiac genotyping test done, or maybe they've only had the antibody test done. At what point might it be helpful for them to pursue an endoscopy and really try to evaluate it more thoroughly? But first, if I may, start out by asking a dumb question, but you have celiac disease yourself, correct?
I do, yeah. I've been living with it for 10 years.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask how long ago you were diagnosed. And is that what prompted you to go into dietetic school and then ultimately work with celiacs yourself in your practice?
Yeah, so it definitely prompted me to go to dietetic school, but I actually had no intention working in the celiac space. I thought I was going to do more general gut health, gut healing, that kind of thing. And then through like my educational career, I kind of fell in love with talking to the celiac space and advocating and educating. And so I just kind of naturally fell into specializing in celiac.
Isn't it funny how that works? I kind of had a similar situation. I set forth in functional medicine thinking I'm going to work with Hashimoto's and other autoimmune stuff because that was the first thing that really piqued my interest. My mom had been hypothyroid for a lot of years and I wanted to help her. So I kind of took the deep dive down to autoimmunity rabbit hole first. And then it was because of healing my own IBS and then working with patients that I was like, all right, I think this is actually my group. Like, these are my peeps. These are the peeps I need to help. I mean, the autoimmunity stuff is cool too, but not cool if you have it. But yeah, it's funny how like the universe kind of brings you over to the path that you're supposed to be on for whatever reason.
I think having the condition or having the similar experience of your clients allows you to provide a different level of care than if they were seeing someone who didn't know firsthand what they're going through. And like for me, it's just that much more rewarding because I have that connection to the experience too. Yep. But also, you have to be careful of your biases. And so, it's a double-edged sword that you have to kind of balance, but it's been a lot more rewarding.
Yeah. And I remember even like, again, full disclosure, creeping on you on Instagram. I don't know if you have much recollection of it, but you did a post or a series of posts maybe a month or 2 or 3 ago about traveling. And I think, remind me where you went. You had gone somewhere, I want to say in South America or
Costa Rica. Yeah.
Costa Rica. I remember thinking, oh my God, that looks wonderful and amazing and monumental. But you had actually found like a tour guide or a group that caters to people with, was it celiac disease or dietary restrictions in general? I forget which now.
They specialize in celiac disease. The owner has celiac, but they are willing to accommodate other restrictions too.
Okay. Yeah, and that's, case in point, you wouldn't have had occasion to, find that company and go down to Costa Rica and experience that yourself if you didn't have celiac disease yourself. right?
Right.
So it allows you to discover a lot more tools and tips and tricks and ways that people can navigate it if you're kind of currently navigating it to some degree yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'll share to kind of frame the episode too. Sometimes I joke, I'm 99% sure I have celiac disease. So I'm kind of one of the squirrely ones that maybe will get some eye rolls. So for me, when I was having gut problems and back pain and headaches and all sorts of stuff, I happened to do some blood work through Cyrex Labs, and it was like a food sensitivity kind of panel. And what's so weird, like in the healing journey, I was so overwhelmed at the time that I saw the gluten panel came back with a whole bunch of hell no's. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Like, I'm just not going to eat gluten. And I kind of like put the paper away and I didn't come back to it. And then, I kid you not, I don't even know, maybe 5 years ago or something, I decided, I'm going to look at that piece of paper just out of curiosity again. And I had the tissue transglutaminase 2 antibodies on that test. And I was like, oh, I didn't even register that probably means I have celiac disease. Okay. And I know that my body super hates gluten anyway. So like either way, I'm at the point where I'm not willing to reintroduce gluten for the sake of doing an endoscopy, just for another person to tell me what I already kind of know. And with my family history riddled with autoimmunity, with everything, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, type 1 diabetes, like the writing's on the wall. I'm pretty sure we're all carriers of the celiac genes. And then I think that I was manifesting it as actual celiac disease. But yeah, I'm one of those kind of oddballs that like for a lot of the time I thought I was just gluten sensitive. And I would tell people I'm gluten sensitive, but I'm not a celiac. And then only a handful of years ago, I was like, oh, I guess I need to start being extra super duper careful with my gluten exposure after all. Whoops.
Yeah. I think it's great that you have that experience too, because there is a huge discourse in the celiac community of, do you have an official diagnosis or not? And kind of there's almost like this elevated status that you have if you have an official diagnosis. And if you don't, it's almost like you don't deserve as much respect. And I think it's really important to understand it's not usually the person's fault. The healthcare system usually ends up failing someone in some case where they end up needing to take their health into their own hands. And so they resolve to remove foods without proper medical guidance. And so they've removed gluten and it's too terrifying to try to reintroduce it back. Yeah. And if you ask any celiac if they would reintroduce it back, they're all going to say no. So like, how can we expect these other people to do it? Or alternatively, a provider wasn't aware of the proper screening and diagnosis route. And so they weren't able to get the proper diagnosis in that role. And so there are a lot of people who are left with this, like, I'm pretty sure I'm celiac, but I don't have an official diagnosis. And they deserve just as much respect in them navigating their needs as much as a person with an official diagnosis does too.
Yeah. Yeah, and it feels super unofficial because I diagnosed it myself too. So, like, that's the extra layer of, like, it wasn't even like, another provider told me, yeah, you probably have celiac disease, but we don't know. It's like me telling myself that. So it's this extra layer of like, this feels a little bullshitty. But I think I'm still okay with it because, like I said, my body hates the stuff. And I see my mom's side of the family riddled with the autoimmune diseases that are strongly correlated with celiac disease. So I'm just going to put 2 and 2 together and call it good.
And I think that's the perfect example, though, of the healthcare system failing people because, like, why did you feel like that was something you had to self-diagnose yourself with? Why wasn't anybody else saying anything or testing you for these things? And I know you opened up with, like, this mention of people likely have had exposure to celiac and they were screened for it before an IBS diagnosis. And for me, no one screened me for anything. They didn't do any of the exclusionary tests. And I know a lot of providers, I think the awareness is growing, but I know a lot of providers still don't. So they just were like, oh, you have diarrhea, you have reflux. We're just going to give you a pill for your reflux and diagnose you with IBS and send you on your way. And like for 10 years, I was going in and out of the doctor's office like, seriously, I don't think this is what's wrong with me. Please, like, what else could it be? And then like, it actually took my mom getting the diagnosis for them to even consider testing me for it. So it was a wild ride. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting too, because we see this often as well. There's just this knee-jerk reaction, I think, especially from like PCPs that are not necessarily specialized in gut issues, to be like, oh, you're having any gut symptom? Let's try a PPI first. Which is like, you know, it's crazy because, you know, you at least had some reflux, but sometimes we'll see people that don't even have reflux, and it's like, they're having gut pain. Well, PPI, and it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, that doesn't seem to match the intervention that's available. But yeah, I mean, like... right. Yeah, it's a bummer when, you know, someone's going long periods of time without an official diagnosis and you're clearly going in for help. Like, you're seeking out help and trying to get an understanding, but not necessarily being taken super seriously. We see that again in our space too, but I think I could see it definitely being present, especially in the celiac, where there tends to be, like, because of the severity of damage that can happen with celiac disease in terms of, like, the pathology of the disease, like, the earlier the better in terms of diagnoses. So right. It's a shame when there's people that have come and asked for help and they haven't been screened properly and that sort of thing. Because again, go ahead.
I think the other barrier here is health insurance and the lack of coverage for certain testing. And I know for me, I was on Medicare or Medicaid. I was on one of the welfare health insurance systems. And I can't help but wonder if that's why no one thought or did any tests, because it wouldn't be covered, or they didn't have enough to get insurance to cover it. And I know, like, if you act, like, I've polled my audience on how much it costed them to get their diagnosis, and it's in the thousands to $10,000, like, just to get a diagnosis. That can be a huge barrier and a huge dissuasion of trying to get the official diagnosis too. And almost in some degree, it is a privilege. I mean, you know, it's a horrible thing to say. It's a privilege to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, but officially to have a doctor believe you and run the tests and to be able to afford it and have insurance cover it, like, there is a privilege there.
Well, I think a lot of people also are frustrated with the conventional medical system in the sense of, like, they've been ping-ponged to doctors so many times, you know, knee-jerk reflex, oh, you need a PPI, you need an antibiotic, you need a whatever.
Or and it's all in your head, you're too stressed.
Yeah, exactly, it's all in your head.
Just lose weight.
Yeah, like all of this crap that people go through when they go to conventional doctors. And then I know, like, for me, I think a piece of it was that my symptoms were not terribly severe at the time when I did, like, figure out that gluten was a no-go for me. Like, I think that was a piece of it. I wasn't super severe to the point where I was going to GI doctors, for example. But I think another thing for me is that that was in my 20s especially, that was a phase of my life where I was like, I'm done with y'all. Like, I don't want to go to any doctor for anything ever again, because I had a lot of ear infections and I had multiple ear surgeries as a kid and a teen. Like, I had already been under the knife 6 times by the time I was 18 for my ears alone. And I was like, no. From, like, the age of 18 until about 30, I was just like, I'm done. I would have to be dying to go to an MD or a DO. I mean, maybe there's a little bit more context to that, but I think that was a piece of it for me too, was that if it was mild to moderate to a point where I felt like I could tackle it on my own or tackle it naturally, I was hell-bent to stay out of the doctor's office because I had already had my fill of that system by that point in my life. And that was especially my holiday where I was like, I can't, no. Like, I can't look at another doctor right now. I'm done with this. So.
I think that paints, like, a very important picture to understand of, like, oftentimes people who are self-diagnosing and not going the official route are at their wits' ends with the providers. They feel like they can't trust them. They feel like they're being gaslit. And so understanding that complex relationship that's going on with providers and with their bodies, like, they're trying to take it into their own hands. And I think that that's speaking to the healthcare system and the way that it's failing people, where they feel like they can't go to a provider to get help anymore. They feel like they're not being heard. And I get a lot of like flack for sounding like I'm anti-doctor, and I'm absolutely not, but I am pro doctors actually listening and taking action on what their patients are saying and not writing it off as, things that it's basically the patient's fault and there's nothing that they can do, because I feel like there's oftentimes many things that they could do outside of just prescribing a pill or saying it's your stress, manage your stress better. And even in that sense, like telling someone to manage their stress and not giving them tools or referring them out.
What does that mean?
Like giving them more sustainable and, actionable tips and help than just like, all right, well, I can't do anything. So, everything's fine mostly. And I'll see you in a year. Like,
yeah.
See you never.
Well, and I think that again, there's a couple points here. And I think like everything you're describing is almost like trauma. Like they've had trauma in the conventional medical system. And again, you can have trauma in the alternative space too. Nikki and I talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
So there's aspects of that on each side. Like if you feel like a provider hasn't listened to you, or you've been brushed aside, or maybe the intervention was wrong, there is trauma. But I think an important point, and I've had medical trauma, I know Nikki had medical trauma, I'm sure you have, just based on what you've described, of your journey kind of being misdiagnosed at first and that sort of stuff. But I think there are really good doctors out there.
Yes.
And I even have to check my bias at times. I told Nikki a story recently. We might have shared it on the podcast, but I went back to this old PCP that I had recently, and like he's so thorough and so good, so compassionate, really listens. And I think part of it is understanding that you do have the right to choose providers. Again, there's some limitations there if you have insurance and there's a network issue or something like that. So I think that there can be some limitations to it. But I also think that if you feel like there's a provider that's not listening to you or not taking you seriously, you can find a new provider. You can kind of look elsewhere and try to find someone that is a better fit, because there is better fits out there. So again, trying not to close the door completely on certain systems, but more so being like, that provider wasn't right for me. He didn't listen to me. Like I felt like I wasn't a partner in the relationship. But I think it's important to just have that understanding that just because this provider isn't right doesn't mean that you can't find a new one or look for someone that's more aligned with your values and what you're looking for in a doctor.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point of, like, there is someone out there who will listen to you, and you are totally in your power. Like, it's totally in your power to go find them, and you're worth that. You're worth being heard by your providers, and you deserve that. And I also want to hold space for the fact that, like, if I'm reflecting on my journey, it felt like a full-time job in high school, trying to get answers for why I didn't feel good. And I feel like, I just want to hold space for the fact that, and hold space for the nuance of, it's already a full-time job, and adding the job of finding another provider who listens to you is going to be really overwhelming, and you still deserve it. And it's still key to you getting answers and feeling better.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. And we definitely see that with IBS and SIBO also.
Yeah.
Like, people are scouring, the Facebook groups and the podcasts, in this case, the YouTube channels, the summits, and they're just trying to scrape together some sort of a plan themselves, because it's kind of turned into this, like, the only person I can trust is myself kind of situation, which really bites.
Yeah, and I'm kind of talking about that today on my Instagram page, but, it's the burden of being the patient in itself is heavy. And then the burden of trying to act as a provider, especially when you haven't had the training, is also really heavy. And then not having the proper support is also so heavy. And so you're taking on the job of 3 people. And as much as it's a safety mechanism to just want to trust yourself, it's really important that you're starting to branch out and delegate the tasks that need to be delegated, because it is going to eat you alive if you continue to only keep yourself in that loop.
Yeah.
And we also just have a limited time, energy, resources.
Right.
And so if you're devoting so much time to being the provider, to being the support, you can't really take the actionable steps to move forward. So it's sort of like you're always searching instead of actually taking action steps.
1,000%. And I think that shows up in like people taking like bits and pieces from different interventions and not really knowing what they're doing and feeling really lost because they haven't actually been able to just sit with it as a patient and really figure out how it's going to serve them and how it is serving them and what can be changed.
Would you say they haven't digested it all yet?
Yes.
Did you see the joy on my face when I realized I could use that? I was like, wait.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I really think that's such a good point, though, you guys, is that there's already so much that's being asked of you being in the patient seat and filling that role. And, like, you can't spend the time and money and effort doing all of the patient-y things if you're also staying up on all night reading on PubMed or listening to all the podcasts or the summits or the conferences or the whatever. And it's a lot. So sometimes I even tell patients, like, give that to me, like, physically give it to me. And I'm going to hang on to this for you. And I'm going to take that burden from you because I think that you need to lighten your load a little bit.
And this is like the perfect example of even providers have providers. Like even specialists are seeing specialists for the same thing they're specializing in because it is too much to take on all those roles for yourself. Even if you're trained in it, it's still a lot. So, you know, like I'm still seeing a doctor to monitor my celiac. I mean, like providers don't provide for themselves all the time too. There's a limit. Yeah. And sometimes there's beauty in just being with you and healing you and letting someone else guide you on that.
Well, and we're biased, right?
We can't absolutely.
We can't really be objective. Like it, and I'm trying to think of a concrete example right now, but it's really, really hard to look at yourself and be like, oh, this is what's going on. Because we're going to have blind spots.
Yeah, I see that all the time in my client sessions where I'll point something out and someone was like, wow, that was so obvious. I can't believe I didn't realize that. And I'm like, that's what I'm here for. Like, it's not your job to notice that. You're still trying to take care of yourself. That's why you're here with me, because I know what to look for and I'm here looking for those things while you're processing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
now let's talk a little bit this was a great thing to cover, and I think that it's really prevalent, especially with celiacs. Going back to a previous point that popped into my head, it might not feel totally linear in the conversation right now, though. Are you a member of any, like, celiac groups or Facebook groups aside from your own? Because I know I've witnessed some kind of... I rag on the IBS and the SIBO groups all day, every day, it seems like. And I get a lot of flack for that. Amy knows, because we talk about it in this podcast a lot. But I am a member of a celiac and gluten-free specific group in my area in North Carolina. And there's some particular patterns and things that I've seen in there. There's some really great things. Like, I've seen people post about, hey, what doctor did you go to get diagnosed? I think my kid or my spouse might be struggling with celiac disease. We want to get diagnosed. Who do you recommend? Or like, hey, I'm looking for a dietitian to help me navigate the gluten-free diet because I'm overwhelmed. Sometimes even like when a new store or a new product pops up, people will share it in the group. Like we had, I don't know are you familiar with Wegmans grocery stores?
Yeah.
At all?
Yeah. I don't have them, but I'm familiar with them.
So as a New Yorker, I have to put a plug in for Wegmans. So we got Wegmans down here in North Carolina in the last couple of years. And there are so many people who are like, I don't get all the hype. It's a grocery store. Why are people so excited? But the celiac group was one of the first to catch on because the gluten-free section of that store is wonderful. And everybody was posting like, look at all the stuff I got at Wegmans. Oh my God. So there's definitely some great stuff that could come from those Facebook groups, but I'm curious, like, what have you observed in similar groups, if anything?
So there's a lot of misinformation and fear-mongering, and I think a lot of people are seeking health advice that they should be seeking from a provider, from other people who are still just figuring it out for themselves too and don't necessarily have the answers. And I think it's a echo chamber for a lot of old recommendations, and there's not a lot of room for nuance or individualism. So I see a lot with celiac disease, people are diagnosed at different times, and at diagnosis there are a lot of different recommendations that we have changed throughout the years, and there's varying comfort levels with adapting new recommendations or staying in the old recommendations. And so what ends up happening is people aren't able to see that their way of managing celiac and avoiding gluten might not be the right way for everyone. And when you're going to the Facebook groups, everyone's going to tell you what they're doing is right. And the most important thing is you're doing what's right for you. And there's a lot that plays into that aside from general celiac safety recommendations. And this is where I get a lot of people who get into disordered eating, because a lot of what's recommended is not clinically proven, it's not researched, and it's very restrictive, and it's all fear-based because there's not a lot of fact there. There's no one moderating, and they're seeking guidance from people who aren't trained and aren't aware. And so it kind of just perpetuates a culture of disordered eating in the celiac community and perpetuates a culture of restriction, a culture of fear that doesn't have to be. Yeah. So that's my stance. And I do have my own Facebook group, though I'm planning to close it down just because it's a lot to try to moderate. And I'm holding space for the people who are moderating those groups, because it is, you think a post is not going to be controversial, and then like suddenly like everyone's arguing. I'm holding space for the fact that it can feel really hard to find the right kind of support, and a lot of people don't feel like they have the resources, and Facebook groups are one of the most accessible forms, but don't confuse support with like general support, peer support with medical support or healthcare support or support from a provider who's been trained to help you individualize your needs. So like kind of gauging, like, is this a question about like my lifestyle, or is this a question about my health, and how much information and what kind of information do I have to give to get an answer from people? Because if it's your health, usually you're giving information that should be given to a doctor, not strangers on the internet.
And I think it's symptomatic of the bigger problem. Like we said, a lot of people are very frustrated and not trusting of their medical providers and medicine in general. They just think they're going to get a pill pushed on them. So I get the reservation, going to the doctors for everything. But I've seen a lot of stuff that strikes me as disordered eating patterns on those groups, certainly in the IBS and SIBO groups that runs rampant as well. Oh, yeah. And I've seen a lot of posts where people are basically like, here's my whole medical history.
Yep.
What do I have? It's like,
or what do I do? How do I feel better? What made you feel better? And, they're seeking answers, and they're trying to, again, take on that job of the provider. And oftentimes, by the time people get to me, like, we have so much to unpack and so much harm to undo because they didn't see somebody in the beginning, that it breaks my heart that there isn't better for us right now. And that people feel like Facebook groups are their only option, and that people are stuck in that cycle of fear, and they're afraid of everything, and they're constantly getting this advice that is well-intentioned, but is really actually doing a lot of harm.
Yeah, I think that that's very much the case. And I will say, too, and you said you were diagnosed 10 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So probably you observed this as well. I remember I met my first celiac friend that I knew of in 2004. It was in college, and at the time nobody knew anything about celiac disease. Nothing.
There was
no awareness. I feel bad for her, especially in retrospect. I remember I went to college in Buffalo, New York, and we had Wegmans, but at the time they didn't have a gluten-free section. And I just remember she was on my rowing team, and I remember all of us being like, you can't carbo load with us? Like, you can't eat pasta. You can't eat pizza. You can't drink beer. Like, what do you eat? And I remember she would pretty much, I remember Jill eating a lot of cucumbers and artichoke hearts. That's all I really remember her eating.
Artichoke hearts are so good. And you know what?
They're so good, but that was
I found artichoke hearts after my celiac diagnosis, too. I don't know what that's about. But
maybe it's a celiac
I was diagnosed when there wasn't a lot of options in the stores. and a lot of the
now,
options were horrible.
yes,
we have come
cardboard.
such a far way with gluten-free bread and gluten-free cookies and all of the alternatives.
Yeah.
I don't even think I could get a frozen gluten-free pizza in the grocery store when I was diagnosed, which was really hard. And I think that also made my whole journey way more difficult. But even what's crazy to me is when those things started becoming available, the stigma that came with eating those foods, even though I was on a medically restrictive diet and I finally had these available to me, there was still the stigma of, oh, it's not actually healthier and, I should only be eating whole foods. And so then I had to fight this internal battle of like, oh my gosh, I really just want a gluten-free pizza. And then this battle of like, I want to be healthy. I want to make sure I'm supporting my body and my gut health, etc. And I kind of fell into that. Like, it's so unfortunate that the gluten-free alternatives that are for our medical diet are demonized and we're made to feel guilty or shameful for eating them. And that's something that I see perpetuated in the Facebook groups, like tenfold. Everyone's advice is only eat whole foods, don't buy anything in a package. And I'm like, like, why does it have to be that awful? It doesn't have to be that awful.
Well, it's like, it's a ratio, right? It's a math equation at the fundamental level. Like, if you were to gather all the food you eat in a week and like lay it out on the table, would the majority of it be packaged, processed stuff? Or would the majority be, fresh, leafy whatevers? Like, ideally, you would have some fruits and vegetables. Because I will say, I was also going to point out, I think that the double-edged sword of the abundance of gluten-free products now is that I do know some people, I can think of a family member right now off the top of my head, for example, so with this family member, I think it's very much like, woe is me, I feel bad because I am on this diet, therefore I'm going to overindulge in the processed junky junk, to a point where like the majority of the diet is the processed junky junk. It's like, it's probably okay if you have the gluten-free Oreo or the gluten-free whatever, but like, make sure that you're still eating some fruits and some veggies and some protein and healthy fats, and you're getting a solid amount of your nutrition through the healthy food. But I don't think it has to be completely over to the other end of the spectrum either, where it's like, well, if you didn't raise your own cows and slaughter them with your own bare hands, and if you didn't pick the arugula from your garden this morning on the organic island that you purchased from Mark Zuckerberg, like, if you're not doing that, then you are doing it wrong and you're unhealthy and you're a bad person. Like, we don't need to be way over here. It's just, you also don't want to be on the other end of the spectrum where everything you eat is processed gluten-free crap food. Like, let's meet in the middle.
I think there's a lot of nuance to that too, and this is where you're seeking guidance from people who aren't aware of your health history and necessarily probably shouldn't be. And in that, if the problem truly was you're eating too many processed foods, figuring out what that means, figuring out why that's happening, what's going on there, because it's usually far more complex than it's just they're eating too much processed foods. Usually there's a relationship with food that needs to be unpacked there. There's something going on that hasn't been addressed, and usually that food is meeting some other need, and we have to figure out what's going on. But it's not usually as reductive as, oh, just stop eating processed food.
Stop.
That's going to be the answer. And a lot of the times I also think that doesn't hold any space for the fact that, like, we are in a restriction. And if we know about the binge restrict cycle, when, for example, gluten-free Oreos came out, we couldn't eat Oreos. So now that we can eat Oreos, there was a period of time where we were all habituifying it, we were all normalizing it, and so people might have been overeating on the Oreos while they were figuring out, oh, hey, this is going to be available to me in the long term. And I think, like, in the space of those Facebook groups, no one holds space for all of those nuances and all of the complicated things that play into a food relationship and play into a balanced diet. And it's oversimplified, it's reduced to, just eat unprocessed food, grow your own food, like all this crazy stuff that like is like completely irrelevant to the, and it, what's ironic, what's really ironic is oftentimes we're in these Facebook groups, right, because we aren't seeking the right support from our providers, or we aren't getting it. And they're providing this reductive care to us. They're implying like, oh, you must be not feeling good because you're stressed or you have IBS or whatever happened there. And then we're providing that same reductive care to our peers that we shouldn't even be providing.
Mm.
So,
yeah. And I think, to me, there's a couple points that I want to highlight with this particular side of the discussion. I think that it's really interesting to me because the people that are in the mindset of, I have to eat whole foods all the time or else, like they're in that mind frame. I think the goal then is that I have to eat like as optimally, as quote unquote healthy as possible at all times. But that takes you away from so many other things. Like, it makes your life unproductive. And I think that that's a point I try to strike with my clients is your diet should make you more productive, not less productive. And to what degree you have to eat, or that you have to limit certain processed foods, or that you can eat certain processed foods compared to whole foods, probably depends on the person and the degree of which they feel best eating a certain way. Again, I don't think there should be these hard and fast rules,
right.
And most people can eat some processed foods, and it makes them more productive. It makes things taste good that are processed too. Like, we should be able to enjoy food. There's an aspect of health that comes from enjoying the food that you're eating. And so I think if your whole goal in life is to just eat as healthy as possible for the sake of that goal, then by all means, eat all the whole foods you want, but it could take you away from so many other key aspects of your life and other goals that you want to accomplish. Like, do you want to spend all your time worrying about whole foods, or do you want to spend more time engaging with your kid or pursuing a certain career that you want to pursue or a passion that you want to pursue? Like, everything that pulls you in the direction of having really strict food rules pulls you away from these key aspects of life that are the reason why we want to live, like why we should want to live. And I think I like the idea of sort of looking at it almost as a productivity tool and less of like something that needs to be judged or shamed or like, oh, if I'm gonna, I need to be good enough to stay whole foods forever, I think there's a lot of shame and guilt around it, and instead it should almost be like put in the mindset of like, what makes me most productive? And you can have you definitely should have some whole foods in there, and you can have some processed foods in there, but you want to figure out what foods and what combination makes you thrive in whatever pursuits you're trying to pursue.
Yeah. And I think that you made an excellent point that made me think of something I wanted to touch on was, I think also the reductive explanation of like, oh, just stop eating processed foods or just eat whole foods, that completely discredits the entire celiac experience. And it's almost a coping mechanism to not look at the ways that celiac disease has changed your entire life, because the way that you socialize through food, the way that you connect through food, the way that you participate in your traditions and your culture through food, like literally the entire way you've interacted with the world has changed. And if you are viewing food in this reductive lens of it's just to optimize my health, optimize, all of my eating, then you don't have to face the pain of all of these other things that celiac has changed. And you get to avoid dealing with that trauma. You get to avoid not fully healing from that diagnosis and all of the things that have really changed.
It's kind of an escape in a way.
Yeah. And I would argue in the case of celiac disease, that reductive lens of eating whole foods is a form of hypervigilance. And I would also argue that hypervigilance is disordered eating with celiac disease. And so it's that coping mechanism of trying to control a world that you feel like you just lost control over, or trying to, escape all of those things that have changed and not trying to figure out how you can still live your life and instead, stay in this bubble that is offering you some sense of protection.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you gotta move through the stages of grief almost.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the point that Amy made. Like, I would even say maybe not even the lens of productivity per se, because some people might just be like, I don't want to be productive. I'm gonna sit on a couch and pet my dog all day, and that's my life goal. # goals. So even like if productivity doesn't resonate with you, you can see it through the lens of like, does this enhance my life?
Right.
Yeah,
or does it
perfect.
improve my life?
Right.
Or does it reduce my quality of life? Because again, like
Right.
there are people out there who are like, I love nothing more than organic gardening and going to the farmer's market and chopping vegetables and cooking fresh meals every day. Like, that could be your jam, and that's great. But a lot of people do have other things that they're trying to juggle with a family and a career and hobbies and interests and travel. And it's like, if you want to allocate some time and energy to those other things, you might have to throttle down, the whole food eating a little bit. And it's like, I think also a lot of people, we get stuck on this ideal. Like, I joke with patients sometimes, the ideal human experience, I'll tell you right now, we would all live on a beach. We would be naked. We would live in a cave. No mold, though. It would be a clean cave. But we would live on a cave, on a beach. We would lay around in the sun, soaking up vitamin D, eating freshly caught seafood and kelp and whatever we could grow in the beach. I don't know. And we would just lay around having sex all day, and then we would go to sleep in our cave at night. No job, no money, no nothing, no toxins, no nothing. That's the ideal human experience. But we live in this day and age, and the thought of like quitting your job and going to live naked on a secluded beach and not have any connection with the world is probably unobtainable for most of us. So it's like, if this is the ideal versus, I'll just paint a grim future. There's talk about now like the metaverse. And like we're all going to be wearing like virtual reality goggles and glued into Facebook. Oh, sorry, it's meta now. We're all going to be just glued and plugged into the metaverse 24/7. Apparently, it's very Matrix feeling. If that is the other end of the spectrum, that's like the worst case scenario for human physiology and function and health. But the beach scenario is the ideal scenario for human health. Again, it's like, can we meet somewhere in between? Maybe a little bit closer to the beach end of things, preferably. But like, can we meet somewhere in between? So like, no, technology is not evil, but you shouldn't be glued to it 24/7. No, processed food isn't evil, but that shouldn't be 100% of your diet. No, it's not a bad thing to spend all of your time and money and effort into preparing fresh, whole foods, organic meals all the time. But if it's robbing you of your sense of living your life, then maybe it's detrimental, and you can come down the ladder a little bit.
I think also, coming from this as a lens of like a dietitian, I think it's important to talk about processed foods too in a lens of like, they also serve a purpose. And like if the vegetables you're eating are frozen and canned, technically it's processed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lesser nutrition value offered there. And also viewing the lens of like, this whole conversation, we've been talking about food just as the nutrients that it offers us, but also kind of balancing the other things. And that's where you're getting at, I think, Nicole, is kind of balancing what are the processed foods offering us? Maybe it's not nutrition, maybe it's comfort, maybe it's, connection with family. We're gathering around a frozen pizza or something like that. And then kind of balancing like the nutrition aspect of it. And even processed foods can offer nutrition, but kind of looking at food as not just this nutrition lens, but this lens that's going to serve your whole self. And nutrition is a huge part of that, especially with health, but other parts of health, like mental health, emotional health, your relationships, food can play a role in that too, and trying to hold balance for that. And I think like there are two extremes, and we have to figure out how to get in that middle, where it doesn't feel like it is pulling us apart. And I would argue like truly paying attention, because I know people who would be like, is this going to improve my life? And they would argue like all of this restrictive behavior, this disordered eating behavior would improve their life, because like the message that I get is, I'm absolutely avoiding gluten. I'm never going to get exposed. But kind of looking at like, okay, what is this adding and what is this subtracting and what am I sacrificing for this? And is that really a sacrifice that's worth it? And ultimately they get to decide, the person gets to decide. But, I want more of a life for people than just worrying about, perfect eating and worrying about like never getting exposed to gluten because, and this sounds kind of negative, but we do live in a food system, a global food system centered around gluten. It is unrealistic to think that you're never going to get exposed. And we live in a cultural food system. Like our culture is centered around gluten. I'm not saying go intentionally eat gluten. I'm not saying like engage in intentional risky behavior, but it's unrealistic to expect that you're never going to get exposed simply because of the world that we live in and simply because the world wasn't built for the level of restriction that we need.
Yeah.
Yeah. And go ahead, Nikki. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I've been exposed to gluten and, I know the most recent big one that comes to mind, I think that there are some gluten exposures that maybe could be circumvented if you had a little bit more education on the topic or if you learned to be a better advocate for yourself. So, for example, my mom, this was a couple years back, but my mom is very sensitive to gluten too. And similarly, we think she's probably a celiac, but at this point, we're not going to risk reintroducing for her. And with Hashimoto's and rheumatoid arthritis, like, there's pretty strong likelihood that she's a celiac. But for her, it was a handful of years ago, maybe 8 or 10 years ago now. She did it was like a bed and breakfast that did some sort of like murder mystery night kind of thing with the people who were there. Yeah, it was neat. It was like a Groupon in Rhode Island that she did. And they lived in Boston at the time. And so my mom went with a couple of her girlfriends, and it was the murder mystery thing, and it was a bed and breakfast, so there was food. Well, she reached out to them ahead of time and told them of her dietary needs. They said cool, so she went down. The next morning at breakfast, they gave her something that looked like a muffin, but it was a different muffin than anybody else had. So she was like, okay. And she actually did ask, to her credit, she said, I was the one who had emailed and asked about gluten because I can't have gluten. And they said, oh, don't worry, that's the low gluten muffin. Mm. And my mom, at the time, not really knowing any better, she was like, okay. It was high enough gluten that she got symptoms. Let me just say that. She was quite unwell after that low gluten muffin. So like some of it is just you learn from experience or you learn from stories like that, and you learn that if anybody tells you it's from the low gluten menu, probably don't eat it. Or like anything that is not, it's like if they're trying to skirt around saying gluten-free, but they don't want to blatantly say yes or no to the gluten-free question, like that's a red flag. But then for me, like no amount of education would have increased the likelihood I would have gotten away with this one. So I was at a conference, a functional medicine conference, ironically enough, and they even had a list of nearby restaurants that were gluten-free friendly, so you could go to those if you needed to. So my friend and I went to the restaurant that was on site at the convention center or whatever it was, and ordered the catch of the day. And I asked specifically about gluten, and they said, oh, the catch of the day comes with a side of quinoa. I was like, okay, cool, great, because I really can't have gluten. I'm pretty sure I specifically told them celiac disease. They were like, cool, yeah, you got it. I confirmed like 3 times. Yep, catch of the day, gluten-free. It comes with quinoa. You're totally good, lady. I'm like, okay, great. And my friend and I hadn't seen each other in a long time, so we were just shooting the breeze. We were having a grand old time, yucking it up. And the plates get put down in front of us, and I did not think to use my eyeballs. I trusted that I talked to the person 3 times, and they confirmed gluten-free quinoa, you're good, ma'am. And I like reflexively, reached for my spoon or whatever, and I shoveled a big old pile of this quinoa in my face, chewed, swallowed. Then I looked down and I realized that's quinoa plus something else that I do not recognize, and that's a bad sign. Like, I know what rice looks like. I know what an oat looks like. That is an unrecognizable grain, and it's got a butt crack on it. And if I know anything, it's that the grains that have a butt crack almost always are gluten-containing grains. So I flagged over the waiter, and I said, what the heck is this? But more politely. And he was like, yes, that's the quinoa. And I was like, well, that's quinoa and something else. Can you please go and find out what that is? He goes back to the kitchen. He comes back. He says, oh, yes, it's quinoa and farro. But it's gluten-free, so you're good. You're good. It's gluten-free, ma'am. Don't worry. And I said, can you please confirm that it's farro? Because by this point, I just lost it. And I decided to bring out my 8-wing, for those of you who are into the Enneagram at all. And I just decided, I was like, I do nutritional counseling for a living. I know that farro is not gluten-free. You need to get your facts straight. Go back to the kitchen, and I need you to confirm. Is it farro or is it gluten-free? Because it ain't both. And finally, after a few minutes, he came back and he's like, I'm so sorry, ma'am. It is indeed farro, and you're right, it's not gluten-free. I was like, oh my God. So thankfully, and this, I'll get your opinion out and I'll share my own. Thankfully, I had some like DPP4 enzyme on me, like a gluten flame or something like that. And I just decided, well, it's either take a bunch of this or have diarrhea on the plane tomorrow. So let's see what happens. And I took like 8 capsules of the stuff because I figured, why not? I'll take like 1 or 2 capsules if I think there might be cross-contamination. But I decided, no, I'm just going to take the rest of what I have in my purse and I'm going to hope for the best. It did significantly help. I mean, I had loose stools, if I remember correctly, but the 9-month pregnant belly bloat didn't really happen like I thought it would, and the bowel movement curtailing was much better than I thought it was. And I think I only had a mild headache the next day, but I would say it curtailed about 90% of what I normally would have experienced, and I had a shovel full of the 50% farro, apparently. So I'm curious, have you used or do you recommend the DPP4 enzymes at all, or is that a controversial topic?
That's a controversial topic.
I have found they do help me. Not enough that I could eat like a big piece of pizza, but if it's like a cross-contamination issue or something like that where I have nothing else, I have found they've been, I think, helpful for what I normally would experience had I not taken the enzymes.
So the research that I've read has not been proven that it's helpful for the celiac reaction or reducing any of the symptoms that are associated with the autoimmune cascade that's happening with celiac disease in response to gluten. And I think this is where it's also really important to differentiate, and clearly we all know the difference here, but celiac disease is an autoimmune reaction to gluten, and it's an autoimmune disease. And the pathophysiology is different from a gluten intolerance, which could be triggered by a multitude of things that are causing you to react to the gluten. And so that I can't say it.
DPP4.
DPP4. I think it's usually sold as like glutenated or like gluten. Something like that. That's acting on
digest.
That's acting on the pathophysiology of gluten intolerance, not the celiac autoimmune reaction. And that's not to say that people have a placebo effect, or maybe there's not a balance of like gluten intolerance and celiac playing into your symptoms. But celiac wise, it's not been proven effective in the management of symptoms. But they are working on a drug right now. I think we just hit phase 2 or something.
Yeah. It
just popped up in my feed, but I did not read on it yet.
That's the zonulin. Was it agonist, antagonist? I forget now. Maybe. But it has something to do with zonulin, right?
But it is directly trying to target the pathophysiology of the symptoms that occur with celiac. So that'll be really exciting. Not preventing the damage per se, but reducing the symptoms so you're not hit as hard, which will be really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, fun fact, that's actually being developed at a company about 20 miles from my office at RTP in North Carolina. So, yeah, I forget the name of it now, but yeah, it's actually being developed here in North Carolina. And I forget if it's phase 2 or phase 3, but they're getting close.
Yeah.
And it's like an anti-leaky gut drug on, kind of at its basis, the one that I'm talking about at least. So I think probably...
There are a lot of them. Huh? There are a lot of trials, I think. We're getting a lot of trials out. I've been just getting lots of emails about it, lots of ads for people to come and join the trials. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be curious. I think probably with that one, the zonulin-based drug, again, I forget if it's an agonist, antagonist, what it does exactly, but that one, I'm going to bet that it's going to be approved for celiac disease first, and then we'll probably see it get approved for a lot of other things that are associated with intestinal inflammation or leaky gut. So I could see it getting approved for like Crohn's really quickly after that. Maybe IBS, that one might be a little bit questionable, but I could definitely see it being approved for Crohn's, and some other like GI symptoms down the road after it's approved for celiac. So I'm very intrigued to watch that.
Yeah.
And one thing too, because I know, and we've touched on it, and I think like Nikki's story is really helpful just to put things in perspective. But, I've worked with celiacs, and I've noticed that with celiac clients, there's been different degrees and levels of risk with like eating out at restaurants. So it's like some are like absolutely not, and they get gluten very easily in that kind of situation. And then others, again, are a little bit more, obviously they're careful and they're trying to avoid gluten, but they're more open to going to a restaurant. I was just curious, like your take on kind of examining the level of risk. I'm sure there's a degree of variation between people, but like how you would go about approaching that conversation and what factors maybe to consider with like going out to eat at restaurants and like weighing the risk ratio, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think I'm so glad you brought that up, because I also wanted to mention the story that Nicole, you told. I would tell you, I could list like a bunch of celiacs who would just be like, that's why I don't eat out, or that's why I only eat at dedicated gluten-free restaurants. And for me, the way that I educate people is first you want to be screening the restaurants. You want to call them. You want to see what they know, see how they react to your questioning, see what the staff knows. And if you are asking for certain precautions to be taken, verifying with the restaurant staff that they're going to take those precautions. So first, you always want to be screening restaurants. Obviously, you can screen and show up and it could be a different story, but I think screening helps with that. And then I also think making sure you are asking for the right precautions, and then also ultimately accepting that this is a part of your life that you want to engage in. It's allowing you to celebrate with other people or socialize or meet with people, and it's serving you in these other ways. And you can take all of the right precautions, and ultimately someone else is preparing your food. You're not in control. And so you still might get glutened, and kind of accepting that like that's a decision you're making, but you're doing everything you can to prevent that. And I think in most cases, you should be able to dine out safely. There are some like mishaps that happen and misunderstandings. And I think learning from those situations and also understanding like, because we are in a gluten-centric world, there are going to be cases where you do get gluten despite doing everything right. And, it is a lonely world if you are the only one who ever prepares your food. And I think it's important to get that aspect back. And of course, if you're getting glutened all the time when dining out, looking at your approach, looking at what you're asking for, if there's anything you're missing. I feel like I just went on a tangent.
Well,
but yeah, it was a good one though. It was a good one.
Yeah.
I think, and to your point of, some celiacs are more reactive than others, there are some very strong reactions people have, and I think that plays into how careful they are. But also, I do see this level of hypervigilance and this high level of acting out of a place of fear. If you're going into a restaurant and you're scared and you've already psyched yourself out for the experience, that's going to directly play into how you react afterwards. Right. And also understanding restaurant food tends to be higher in GI irritants like spices, fat. Oftentimes you're overeating, and to no fault of your own, it's just a part of the experience. If you're not tuning into all of that, you can easily mistake getting glutened for just not tolerating the food or being super anxious, or a mix of things happening at once. And that's something that I do teach with my clients and in my group programs, is kind of approaching situations in a calm state. trying to get yourself out of that anxiety cycle, and taking the proper precautions, understanding the precautions that you need to take, getting comfortable with those so you actually take them, and then kind of understanding and figuring out the other food triggers that could be playing into it so that you're not constantly like pointing the finger at gluten and thinking the world is out to get you. You can start to build an understanding of your body and the fact that you are going to not digest things other than gluten well. And if you start to build that understanding, it starts to feel like the world isn't out to get you as much.
That's such a good point. And I do think, yeah, like somebody
sometimes I talk in circles or I talk really long and I like hope I landed where I was trying to go.
Welcome to the IBS Freedom Podcast, my darling. Welcome to the world that we live in. We do that pretty often too. Yeah. But yeah, I think that was such an excellent point where kind of, and I feel like this could apply to IBS and SIBO more broadly too. Like if you know that you're a celiac and you go out or if you eat food at somebody else's house and then you don't feel great, there's probably a bit of a knee-jerk reaction of, oh my God, I was exposed to gluten. And it's like, well, maybe it was something else. Or if you have another food sensitivity, like for example, I can't do dairy. Right. So sometimes it's a crapshoot of, all right, did they put a little bit of butter or something in the sauce of that thing I just ate? Or was it gluten? Maybe I don't know. So there's always these other variables, but if you know for sure you have celiac disease, then you're going to be more likely to write off that restaurant or write off that item thinking that it was a gluten exposure when maybe it wasn't always the case. And I think with SIBO, I was going to say, if you've been doing low FODMAP, for example, and you know that FODMAPs cause symptoms for you, then you might have that knee jerk of like, oh God, I'm bloating. Oh, there must have been a trace amount of onion in it. And maybe not. Maybe there was something else or something about the way you ate it or the timing or the quantity or the spices or something else that threw your body for a loop. Maybe it wasn't always the actual food that you ate.
And I think it's the key thing there is helping my clients get out of a place of fear and into a place of logic and fact and, a true understanding of their needs and not this hypervigilant form of celiac safety. And it's tricky and it's really rewarding if you can get out of that place of fear and you can start to build an understanding with your body. And I also think like playing into that, and I'm sure you see this all the time, if you feel so betrayed by your body and you feel like it's constantly betraying you, you're constantly getting sick, it can be really hard for you to listen. And in not listening, it can put you in that cycle of constantly feeling like the world is triggering you, it's out to get you, you can't eat anything, nothing's safe unless you took care of it, and like playing into that level of control that I would argue is disordered eating. And so it gets really, really tricky and really disordered really fast.
Yeah. And I think it's that your beliefs affect your biology. So, like, if you're going into situations with all that fear, it certainly is going to affect how your body processes food. And I think I like that you're bringing up, there's always multi-variables with certain things. And being able to get curious about reactions versus, like, instant snap judgment of like, oh, I got gluten, or like gluten's everywhere. There is sort of that hypervigilance that you're talking about of just for that one issue. But I think that's, again, recognizing that your beliefs and thoughts and fears affect how your body is going to function as a whole. And I think the other thing I'll mention, I'd be curious about your thoughts. I always feel a little bit like if I go out, I'm definitely not celiac. I can tolerate some gluten. But I do eat some gluten, but I tend to not like eating just straight bread. Doesn't necessarily feel great from a gut standpoint. But it's always interesting to me, if I order off the gluten-free menu at certain places where if they ask me the question of, is this a allergy or sensitivity, typically they're usually the places that I think are doing a better job at educating their staff. And again, that probably would go along with if you called the facility beforehand, you'd get that sense. But it's always interesting to me, like, whenever I hear that phrase, I'm like, like, you seem like you're a little bit more up on the game. And again, who knows if they actually are. But, like, it sends me a signal that it's probably an establishment that's had more training in terms of, you know, how to prepare something if it is a true gluten allergy or, again, a celiac disease situation compared to an intolerance or a sensitivity to gluten. So that, like, little phrase I always kind of pick up on it because I'm always like, oh, like, there's been at least some discussion around the difference, which I think is important.
Yeah, and there are a lot of restaurants that do a really good, solid allergen training, not just for gluten, but for allergies in general, which is where you are removing cross-contact with foods, not cross-contamination, so it requires a different set of preventative measures. And so usually when they're asking that, it's usually like, do I need to mark this as an allergy and they need to prepare it in this like set trained way, or is this something that we can prepare in the regular side of the kitchen or in our regular terms? So I think that can be a good sign. And I would say gluten-free menus, gluten-free reviews on websites, and even just, you know, talking to restaurants doesn't substitute you asking for those precautions when you're dining out. You still need to make it very clear. You still have to advocate for yourself. So even if someone acts like they understand, like what happened to you, Nicole, like even if they act like they know what's going on, you still have to make it very clear what you need, especially because there are varying needs in the gluten-free community. We all seem to have varying needs in this call. And so understanding like that's not a negative. We all deserve respect in how careful we have to be, but that you are your own advocate. And so you need to make sure that you're getting the care that you need and that you're communicating that to your server. And I think that that's oftentimes where I see a lot of disconnect is a lot of people think because there was a review on a website or because they said one thing that it's going to be fine. And there actually are a lot of things you need to ask for, you need to verify. And it's a headache. No one wants to deal with it, but you know, that's a trade-off that we're paying to have the preparation of our food delegated and being able to participate in society by dining out. So.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's a really wonderful part of life is being able to dine out. I mean, all of us kind of recognize that on some level during the COVID pandemic, especially at the beginning when nobody was dining out for anything anymore. And I think everybody collectively went, oh, crap. I have to cook all my food?
Yeah.
Darn it.
Into the life of celiac. I think a lot of celiacs feel that way.
Yeah, so I think the world kind of got a taste of that a little bit. But yeah, I'll add, a lot of times if I'm dining at a new place, now granted, we have like our haunts that we usually go to, right? And we have some places that we just know are typically safe and like we've kind of gotten to trust those locations. But like if I'm seeking out a new place, like if I'm traveling for a conference or something, oh my God, I love the Find Me Gluten-Free app on the phone, or you could use it on your browser. It's not foolproof, which I'm sure you know too.
Right.
Because any Joe Schmo can put a restaurant on there. Like I've like recommended a restaurant before on the app. So the owner of a restaurant could potentially put their restaurant on that app with 0 reviews. And I know, for example, I laughed and I got angry. A while back, I noticed, like, I was kind of perusing the app in my local area, and I kid you not, there was a Chinese buffet on the Gluten-Free Finder app with 0 reviews. And I was like, no. Like, don't get me wrong, I grew up going to Chinese buffets. I would love a good Chinese buffet. I would murder somebody right now if I could go get one of those, like, you know those sugary donut things that they serve?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes. I'd murder somebody for one of those right now. But as much as I was excited to see that Chinese buffet pop up on the Gluten-Free Finder app, immediately my brain was like, no. This, no, you're never going to convince me that that's safe. And I guarantee that was just the owner of the restaurant or the manager was like, yeah, this will get us more customers. Cool. No. So, yeah, the app is a great start.
Yes, it's a start. It's a good way to figure out restaurants you want to screen, but you still need to make sure you're doing the screening. Because again, it's also find me gluten-free, and there are a lot of reasons why someone might be gluten-free. There are a lot of levels of strictness aside from celiac disease. So you have to do your due diligence, and even if a celiac said they ate their fine, you have no idea what that celiac knows or doesn't know, or what skills they have or don't have in sourcing safe food. You don't know if they're silent celiac or not. So you really have to make sure like you're protecting yourself, because you are the only one. You're your best advocate. An excellent point. It's a starting point.
And you don't know when, Sharon on the gluten-free Finder app said, oh, I had a meal, it was wonderful, it was safe. You don't know, did Sharon just walk in off the street, order something off the gluten-free menu, and then just eat it? Or was she
exactly
like having a come to Jesus moment with the waitstaff, like, all right, yo, look at me now, garçon. If there's a crumb of gluten on my plate, I will keel over and die. Like, you need to wear different gloves. You need to prepare it in a different kitchen, in a different state. You need to do this. You need to, was she ultra vigilant, or was she super not vigilant? You don't know that based on reviews.
Right.
So you still want to do whatever you need to do to feel safe and ask the questions and do the things. And I'll say too, just as a really easy pro tip, I always sit on the outside of a booth. Everywhere I go, my family just knows that I'm going to be the one on the outside of the booth, because then I'm closer to the waiter or waitress and I can have that come to Jesus moment.
I didn't even think about that. That is genius. Oh,
it's so easy. You just,
adding
outside.
that to all my guides.
It's good. And that way, because if it's like a noisy restaurant and they're like, oh, you want the noodles with the, okay, cool. No, if I'm right there in front of them, I know they can hear me. I can hear them. We confirm we're having a good moment together. So
yeah, that's smart.
Very tiny pro tip, but helpful.
I can't wait to actually visit you in person, Nikki, and go to a restaurant with you and see your skills in person.
I'm actually pretty chill, but I don't really do this to the waiter or waitress, for the record, but I like to have the ability to do that if need be, because I'll say too, some people are just lazy, and I love being lazy. I can Netflix and chill. Hold on, you guys are younger than me. Does that mean sex? Because I think at some point
it depends on the context.
But not always. Okay.
Context.
I mean it in the I'm 35 years old sense. I don't mean Netflix and chill we'll watch Netflix and have sex. I mean, we're watching Netflix and we're just chilling, for the record. But now, back to the point. I can Netflix and chill you wouldn't believe. And I love not getting out of pajamas for days. But, sometimes the laziness gets me. I remember once, again, this was 10 years ago. Again, my body super hates dairy also. And we were at a restaurant. It was with my husband's research group from grad school. So there was 20 students and the 2 professors, and it was a giant long table at this Mexican restaurant. And, I sat on the edge of the giant table and I talked to the waitress, thought we were having a good moment together. She got it. I was cool. And she disappears. And I usually tell people at a Mexican restaurant when I go there, I'll be like, hey, I can't have sour cream or cheese because dairy super messes with my gut. So if you're omitting the blob of sour cream, can I have an extra blob of guacamole? You can ask. They can say no.
Yeah.
Right? But I do not embarrass easily. And if I can get a little bit more free guacamole, I'm going to get a little bit more free guacamole. So, I did my usual stick of I can't have cheese, I can't have sour cream, but hey, can I have some extra guacamole? She's like, yeah, sure. So they bring back the plates, and it was one of those situations with a fajita or something. So they give you the generic plate of rice, beans, guacamole, sour cream, and those are mass produced in the kitchen. She brings me my plate. It's got a big old blob of sour cream. No big deal. Again, we were a group of 22 people, and it was a busy restaurant. I get it. I was like, oh, hey, sorry. I was the one who can't do dairy. Can you please bring me back a plate with double guacamole, please? Thank you. And get rid of the cheese and the sour cream. Or bring me back a plate without the dairy. And she's like, yeah, sure. She brings it back. I kid you not. She took it to the back.
Yep.
She scraped it off, left the skid mark of sour cream visible on the plate for all to see, and then she just flopped a blob of guacamole on top of the skid mark of sour cream. Gordon Ramsay would lose his ever-loving mind, because there was like, right up to the edge of the plate. Not cleaning the edge of the plate, no, nothing. Not even hiding what she did. And she brings me back that plate, and that's when I got a little bit pissed. I was like, okay, whoa, wait. And I had to explain. I was like, if I even have a little bit of dairy, diarrhea for days. Like, this is not acceptable. Can you please bring me back a clean plate without the dairy? And then she did, and everything was fine. But I was like, for God's sake, like, I sympathize. You're busy. It's a big group. I get it. But also, it would have taken you precisely 1 extra minute, maybe, to get me a brand new plate and just give me a new safe plate instead of and calling it good. I just about lose my mind with that kind of stuff.
With gluten, you might not be able to tell when they just do that.
Exactly.
No skid mark. So that's where I tell people, cut your food, change your food so they can't just like throw it back on, so that you know you get it back. So like cover your salad in pepper or salt, or take like a bite out, so like they can't just take off the gluten and call it good. Because they'll try to do that too, and I think that's where like there's a misunderstanding of the level of strictness that you need. Mm-hmm. And I think, holding space for like the overwhelm of being a server, and then also understanding like it is also your job to keep advocating for yourself. Like, you're the only person, so asking for that to be remade, making sure it's remade, that's on you.
Yeah, or maybe another, and I've never done this one, but this might be food for thought. If you don't trust that they're going to bring you back a brand new plate, you could also ask to hold on to the first plate until they come back with a new one.
That's really smart too, yeah.
Kind of like ransom, right? Like, I'm going to hold this plate ransom until you bring me back my new plate.
Yeah.
That could be good. I might have to implement that next time somebody violates my trust at a restaurant. We'll see. Luckily, it's not super frequent, but that might be a good tactic. Because, like, they'll just and call it good, and then you don't have a skid mark to go off of. Like,
you described it as skid marks, and I was like,
no,
that
God.
worsened it for me. Like, not even trying to hide it.
Just, no, right to the edge of the plate. Not even trying to hide it at all, and then plop another guacamole on top. I was like, I can't deal with this right now. Mm-hmm. I will say, though, I feel bad. I've told these bad stories of bad experiences, but I'm curious if you want to plug a good restaurant. I will say, probably the best restaurant I've ever dealt with, and it's actually like a small chain. If you ever get a chance to go to Massachusetts, go to Legal Seafood. Oh. My God. They're so, A, the food is amazing, but B, they take allergies and food issues so seriously, they will bring you your food on a completely different plate. Like, I forget what it is now. Like, if the whole restaurant normally uses circular plates, they will bring you a square plate. And it's got like a little dorky flag in the thing. So it's like they have multiple layers. And oftentimes if you order something that's allergen-free or gluten-free or something, it's not the waiter that brings it to you. It's the manager that actually brings you. So it's a new human being with a dorky little flag in the food and a completely different shaped plate. And they assure you, this is the gluten-free, I made sure everything is great. They are just so on top of it, above and beyond any restaurant I've ever been to, ever.
And I've heard really good reviews. I've also heard some mixed ones, and I think that that's where it's also really important. Again, you're communicating your needs, too. Even if they have, like, those really solid standards in place, you're still verifying. But yeah, so I really appreciate when restaurants do that, and they have like, they're marking your food as gluten-free. Like some restaurants will do like a little flag, or they'll, give you a separate plate. Sounds like they do both. I think P.F. Chang's generally has a separate side of the kitchen that's gluten-free, and they'll give you a plate that's marked only for gluten-free. And Red Robin's used to do it, though. The one that's near me has been a little dicey. So, I think it's kind of weighing your options, and doing like, I will say P.F. Chang's. Also say, I think you hit the nail on the head where you said you have like your local haunts or your favorite haunts.
Yeah.
Part of dining out and figuring out how to do it safely and doing it safely consistently is actually doing it and finding the places that are going to accommodate you and give you a good experience. And you're never going to figure that out, and you're never going to find those places if you don't do it. And you know, as scary as that is, there are tools that you can use, and there are strategies that you can use to calm yourself down, to keep yourself safe. And, yeah, I think like that's one of the other tips is figuring out what those places are around you that are going to take care of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually just thought of like another little nugget, pro tip also. I don't think this is always applicable, but sometimes it could be useful. So one of our haunts that we really, really like here, there's a restaurant that does really good gluten-free Chinese food, which again, like, they don't do those sugary little nasty donuts, unfortunately. But like a lot of other stuff, they'll do gluten-free calamari also, which is a nice treat. But you know, like you could get like a fried meatish item with a sauce and a rice kind of, I don't even know. So we'll go there a lot of the time and you like get takeout and bring it home. And we're creatures of habit. My mom always gets the same thing. My dad and I always get the same thing. And my husband usually gets the same thing when he gets takeout there. And my mom and I are both gluten-free. My husband and my dad are not, and my daughter is not. But knowing that like they're going to put all of this food into one big bag and we're going to take it home, like especially with my dad's in mind, we could order his. So it's like the walnut candy shrimp, I think is what we get. And knowing like they could make his off of the regular menu and make it maybe slightly differently, and it would contain gluten, I guess. Or mine is ordered off the gluten-free menu and that it would be safe for me. And I would assume that they would know enough to mark GF on top of the one that's gluten-free. But I always am paranoid enough that I'm like, whenever, you know, if I'm placing the order, if my mom is placing the order, I always tell her, just have the whole order be made gluten-free. And that way, if they don't label which one's which, they're both safe for me to eat. I don't have to worry about it. Or like, if one of us wants to eat the leftovers from the other person, it could be safe to do that, potentially. So generally, like, at least for that restaurant, now, it wouldn't be practical if you were ordering, like, a sandwich. The other person might not want the gluten-free bread, and that's okay. But, like, at least for that particular restaurant, we usually order the whole order gluten-free, and that way there's no confusion when we get it home, and we don't have to try to figure out, like, all right, they didn't label the container, which one is safe for Nikki to eat.
Yeah. And I wanted to say also, if you're in Columbus, the Cameron Mitchell restaurants do a really good job at preventing cross-contact with gluten, and they're very knowledgeable. I don't know if you've been able to go to them, Amy.
Are they, like, name some for me? Are they, like, a chain, like, kind of like, there's a...
Marcella's, Molly Woo's, gosh, I can't think of the diner. They have a diner. Oh, Cap City. Some of the,
I don't know if I've...
at the top of my head.
I don't know if I've been... I feel like I haven't been to Columbus in a while.
Yeah.
So maybe you're enticing me with some new haunts to go to.
They're, so I would say, like, they're pretty pricey, but when I'm dining out, honestly, like, I'm willing to pay more, and I'm willing for my food to take longer, to know that I'm getting safe food, so it's one of those places that's, like, worth not having the headache.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, it's worth paying more to not have the headache. They have a very, very good reputation, and not to, like, I guess to show pride, you know, Columbus State graduate, the owner's a Columbus State graduate, they're really, really diligent. At least when I've dined there. I would say COVID's changed a lot. So, like, all recommendations I would take with a grain of salt simply because staff is changing. There's, like, a lack of training. People are, like, basically hanging by the seat of their pants in the restaurant industry. So, like, holding space for that, too. It's a little dicey out there, especially right now. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible. Just making sure you're doing your own due diligence, too.
Right.
I probably sound like a broken record.
We do too.
Yeah, we definitely do.
If you listen to enough episodes of our podcast, Also, don't stop listening to our podcast, please. But if you were to listen to all of them, you would probably get a lot of the same kind of themes of like disordered eating, under eating, Facebook groups, not so good. Doctors who don't listen to you, not good.
Right.
Like, there's some definite recurring threads in this podcast, so it's all right.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Sometimes it takes kind of beating a dead horse to get certain things ingrained too. That's kind of what I think.
Yeah, I pretty much say, I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over and over on my social media, because I feel like people need to hear it. I'm constantly reminded that someone needs to hear it. And then I'll get clients from social media and they come to me and I'm saying the same thing.
Right.
Like, I'm like, this still applies to you. I think there's like a level of like, how much does this apply to me? And getting back to that, like the original start of our conversation of taking on the job of the provider, the patient, the support system, like, sometimes it's not resonating with you as a patient, it's resonating with you as a provider, and you're not able to actually like do anything with it. So that's where like, you know, we are a broken record because we're trying to get to the patient, not the provider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes you just need to hear it in a slightly different way for it to really click. And then like that one neuron is like, oh, that totally makes sense now.
Being able
even though
to
you heard it
directly
10 times.
Yeah, being able to directly tie it to like their experience and saying like, yeah, I said this and this is exactly why it applies to you because of XYZ. Like, you just told me all this. Like, it still applies. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, well, I guess couple of things that I wanted to make sure we talked about too, as I'm trying to think of what we picked your brain on so far. It's been so fun. All right, so we have different. I want to word this the right way. I want to say different experiences or levels of trust in the DPP4 enzyme, which we've established. Again, N equals 1. I think that it's helped me previously, but again, I did take a Whoppin' dose the one time, so maybe it was just the sheer number that I took.
Or the
so sometimes, like,
listen. And I hope you hold space for that. Like, the placebo effect is powerful. I don't think people give it enough credit. So, like, you know, who knows? And I'm all for things that help people. But I just like to present, like, the research I've read is not there with the celiac side of things. And obviously there could be an intolerance at play with everyone. Who knows? Especially if you've not been eating gluten for a while. Yeah,
exactly. But I think, you know, what things would you recommend to somebody who got glutenated? So say like my mom's experience where she was like, okay, I'll have the gluten light muffin. And then hour later, she's like, oh God, that was not a gluten light muffin after all, OMG. Do you have any tips or tricks for what somebody can do in the heat of the moment when they've gotten glutenated? I know I have a few, but I'm curious to get your take first.
So I think it depends on the symptoms that they experience. And for me, it's generally about self-soothing and understanding, one, you're not a bad celiac for getting gluten. It happens to the best of us. To try to avoid that guilt and shame that tends to come with it. And to really just accept it. This is where you're at. Try to learn from it if you can and let that part go. Let the part that, like, you got glutened, a mistake happened, let it go. Don't let it eat you alive. And don't let it distract you from the fact that you deserve to be taken care of in this moment. You deserve to find relief in this moment, and figuring out what forms of relief you can give yourself given whichever symptoms that you're experiencing. And, you know, like the common ones, diarrhea, making sure you're staying hydrated. And this is where I think, you know, lifestyle balancing a gluten-free diet can help if you're already eating a diet balanced with fiber for your body, balanced with proper hydration. It'll help kind of alleviate some of the exaggerated symptoms, but also staying hydrated. Let's think. A lot of, you know, carminative herbs if you're having a lot of gas and bloating. You know, stuff that'll help comfort you. So Warmies, or I just said a name brand. I don't know if that's allowed.
It is now.
Heating pads, to like comfort any bloating or soothing. So really just stuff that like helps you self-soothe. And I think like letting that be a part of your healing journey and letting that be a place where you can learn from yourself and listen to yourself and build a better relationship in your body in a sense of like, you do deserve to find self-soothing, and, that can look different for everyone is important. feel like I went on a tangent. I feel like it really depends on the person and what they're struggling
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
No, and that's perfectly reasonable. And that in of itself is a solid answer. I will add, like the enzymes, if you're going to take them like with the meal or shortly after the meal. Like I said, for me, that was the very first bite I took. And then I still had the rest of the meal. So like I had the enzymes in my purse and I took them right away in that moment. If I had waited until I ran to the store and bought the enzymes, or if I had waited until I got back up to my hotel room and then got out the enzymes, an hour or two later, I really don't think they would work at all at that point. If anything, you want to take it with the thing that you got exposed to. So I feel like if you're going to use them very, very promptly, like immediately after the bite of food that you are suspicious of. Another one that I forgot to share too that had helped me a bit, I was traveling for a conference. This was years ago. I was traveling for a conference, and I think, as far as I could tell, I think I got cross-contaminated at a restaurant, and I realized it when I got back. I was out and about after this conference, and luckily there was like a little grocery store, so I ran in there, and I just, thinking of whatever I could grab, because I was at a hotel, I grabbed some ginger, and I just I peeled it with a spoon, and I chopped it off with like a crappy knife from my hotel room, and I basically made ginger tea in the hotel room, and then the couple of days after that, and I felt like that helped quite a lot with the bloating.
I think it's a carminative.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
it has
carminative,
the
antispasmodic, anti-inflammatory. So the mechanism I could go either way with. But the ginger seemed to really help in the moment, and you could theoretically get that at most grocery stores, no matter where you are in the country.
Ginger and mints. I find like mints have really cut down on my bloating if I am really bloated, and I can take a mint, or I can do mint tea. Also, what's interesting, a lot of these things can help soothe, and then if you have like GERD or IBS, it could also like worsen things. So that's where like figuring out what serves you best. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Ginger's really powerful. I'm sure you know.
Yeah, it probably people who have been on my YouTube channel get sick of me talking about ginger, because I feel like I mention ginger at least once every episode.
People don't know this, but I got my complimentary care certificate, and I wrote like a whole essay of like all of the healing benefits of ginger and all the research to support it. Like I'm Ginger's number one fan.
See, I knew I loved you. All that creeping, it paid off. Look, we're ginger sisters in a weird way. I mean, it could be profoundly helpful, and it's a prokinetic too, so it's going to help regulate motility and the MMC and help brush the crap out of your intestines. So ginger is very multi-talented. I will add too, I had asked before we started the podcast the nature of your last name, and you shared that it's a Swedish last name. I imagine, do you also have a special place in your heart for cardamom? Because I know my grandmother used to have, I don't know what it's actually called, but there was this sticky bun recipe that it was basically like cardamom and in like sticky buns, and we just called them Swedish buns. I don't know what the actual name of them would be.
I think they're actually, oh my gosh, the Scandinavians are going to come for me. I don't think they're Swedish. I think they're Danish. I know.
Family drama.
And I might be wrong on that too. But I don't think they're Swedish. I think they're Danish.
I'm gonna have to,
nobody come for me.
I will task you with asking your Swedish relatives, because I don't know anybody who still lives in Sweden that I could ask, but
I know they make them. I know they're very common in Sweden, but I think the origin is Danish. Because I am a member of my local Scandinavian club in Columbus, and they had we did like a whole cooking thing making them, and I'm pretty sure they were marketed as Danish. I'm trying to remember what they called them.
This is a family scandal. I hope you're aware. Like, this is family scandal for me, because all my life I grew up calling those things Swedish buns, and now I'm so disillusioned. My foundation is shook. But
I'll have to get back to you.
the point being is that cardamom is also a carminative herb and can help with gas expulsion. So if you have some
pretty much
cardamom
like a lot of
or
those,
fennel,
a lot of the sweeter herbs that like I feel like people tolerate a lot, like tolerate in a like flavor wise that taste really good, are really good in teas and stuff, are pretty carminative. I feel like anything I think of, I'm like, oh, that's carminative. I mean, obviously there are some things that aren't carminative, but like a lot of them, I'm like, oh wow, that's carminative.
You'd
like
be surprised.
licorice.
Like if you just do a Google search and pull up a list of like carminative herbs, a lot of stuff pops up.
I know. Yeah. Which is, you know, part of the like food is medicine and culinary cooking. This is one of the reasons we cook with a lot of those herbs. Because they help with digestion.
Also because it's yummy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, it helps. It helps.
Now I want some Danish buns. And that's another example of like, okay, it would be a processed food, right? If we, and we've done this now, and they're decent. It's not quite the same, but they're decent. We've swapped out the dairy ingredients for vegan substitutes, and we've swapped out the gluten flour for gluten-free flour, and we've made something kind of reminiscent of what we used to call Swedish buns, grandma. But, it's like, is that healthy for you? Oh, probably not, because it's all like rice flour and God knows what. But it's like the flavors of childhood.
Framing it like healthy in what sense? Because if it's bringing you back those cozy memories and those memories of your grandma, and it's comforting, like that's serving you in a very beautiful way. And you can balance that with also the nutrients of other foods. Like it doesn't have to be just nutrition from food. Yeah. Exactly. Perfect example.
The nostalgia.
Although now I'm going to have the nostalgia of the lie that I was told all my childhood.
Right.
Grandma. What are you doing up there, Grandma? You hear me?
Listen, you know what? And if I'm wrong, my Swedish fruits are going to be like,
oh,
what is wrong with you? Did you even live here?
We are going to hold you to it, and if you're wrong, we're going to come to Columbus and get you.
Oh my God.
So there. Ha. Oh my goodness. Well, all right, Amy, if you have anything else scholarly to talk about, you're going to have to take it away from here, because now I'm shook by the drama of my family heritage being a lie, or the buns being a lie. So now, Amy, do you have any scholarly thoughts to think about?
I don't know. I feel like we've hit on a lot of the dietary stuff. Tayler, do you have anything that we haven't covered that you really would like to cover?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Folks.
Yeah.
There you have it. I mean, I'm drawing a blank, but again, I don't know if it's because of the
I feel like we had a very well-rounded, robust conversation that I myself need to process. Like this has been a lot. We've touched on a lot of things.
Yes.
My brain has done a lot of exploration.
We need to digest it now.
Yeah.
Dare I say again?
We need to digest it. That is your favorite pun, is it?
It is. Well, 2 in one episode. That's a record even for me. I mean, I think I'm probably the slack stick comedy person here, but yeah, that's pretty good even for me, getting two in a row.
Well, I remember one time I posted about how like undigested trauma could lead to gut issues, and Nikki was like, oh my God, that's the best pun. She was like hyping me up for days, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I didn't come up with it. It wasn't my doing,
it was beautiful, though.
But you were all into that. I love
beautiful.
it.
And I think that I know you guys talk a lot about that on here, and I think a lot of that, there's a lot of overlap with celiac, and there's a lot of, like your body remembers, your body's wise, your body keeps score. If you're not processing these things, I think that plays into a lot of lingering symptoms and a lot of, just challenges that people struggle with overcoming with celiac. So there's a lot of overlap.
Well, and that's the thing is the medically induced PTSD of going through the health journey and getting to the point where you finally get diagnosed appropriately, like all of that is going to fry your vagus nerve to begin with. Mm-hmm. And then heaven forbid, if you had anything else stressful in your life ever, then that's potentially going to diminish the firing of your vagus nerve, shall we say. Fry is so harsh. But, it's like everybody needs good motility and a good vagus nerve. And stress and anxiety and trauma and PTSD, all of the stuff is going to weigh down on your vagal nerve to a point where you're going to compromise motility. And I mean, especially there's a really high amount of celiacs, especially celiacs who do not fully respond to a gluten-free diet. A very high percentage of those people have SIBO, which suggests that they have motility that could use some TLC, which suggests that we need to think about things like vagal tone. And it's like a lot of it comes back to being mindful of your mental health and mindful of some of the stuff you've talked about, like not being feeling guilty or shameful that you got glutenated and you're a bad celiac, or overly stressing about the people who say you have to eat 100% organic whole foods all the time. Yeah, oh my God, you're a bad person if you don't.
Avoiding hypervigilance.
Yeah, like kind of clear away all the clutter in your brain and just focus on what's going to make you happy, what's going to make you healthy, what's going to, elevate your life and make you more happy and more productive and more fulfilled and connected. And I think that's the more practical advice rather than just saying, oh, you need to manage your stress. Like that's such a wusso nothing burger of a recommendation. But people hear that all the time. And then honestly, it's no wonder that a lot of people get honest to God triggered. Like I've had situations, and you guys might have too, I've had situations where I gently bring up the role of stress in physiology with a patient, and I've had people yell at me. Mm-hmm. I've had people get very, very triggered very quickly, and it's like, okay, whoa, that's a PTSD response in and of itself. I get why you're going there, because again, like doctors and people have told you that you just need to manage your stress or you just need to take an antidepressant. Like it's triggering that memory of, oh God, I've been told this before. This person doesn't get it. They're just going to brush me off. And oh my God, they're just going to tell me to take a pill. But it's like just having that triggered response is indicative that you're precisely the person who needs to really hear that message and really digest it, to use it for a third time. I'm acknowledging that. Because it's like, it's important for everybody's health, but especially for people who have gut-centric problems, because, again, the vagus nerve, the gut-brain axis, we can't keep focusing on the gut and ignore the mental health side of things and hope that it's good and, oh, everybody's hunky-dory now. And similarly, we can't just give people a benzo or an antidepressant or tell them to manage their stress and think that that does anything significant for the gut-brain axis. It probably won't.
Yeah. That 1,000%. Yeah. And I think the difference is, and I find like I do sometimes get that gut reaction when I do present that. And the difference is we're presenting solutions. We're either referring out or we're helping them work through, if it's in our scope, like what's going on there, instead of just kind of like, it's your fault, go figure it out. Like, like I'm here on this journey with you, and I know you guys are probably there. Yeah. Like you're in that journey with them. We're committed. So that, I think that's the difference that helps people come around. And I think it's an excellent point to acknowledge like that gut reaction of like somebody saying it could be stress, and it's something that I kind of tiptoe around, but truly like stress does have a strong impact. If it's not triggering symptoms, it could worsen the symptoms that you're having. And so making sure you're managing that is really, really important. And it's not to discredit like the other causes that could be occurring, but that holistic approach, that whole treating the whole person and all their needs, we can't ignore it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The body is all connected. I mean, the cells in your big toe are probably connected somehow to the cells in your eyeballs, and we just don't know how. And it's I think, reasonable to assume that with the gut-brain axis being as well researched as it is, and having a physiological, anatomical connection between the two, the vagus nerve, again, it stands to reason that anybody that has a problem from, your collarbones down to your sits bones probably would benefit from looking at the role of mental health and stress and sleep, for that matter, too, in your physiology and in your health. But again, it's not this like judgmental, like, meh, it's your fault, right, and you're a bad person, and here, just take this pill and get out of my hair, see you never.
Right.
Yeah. Like, it's not that. And I think, in honesty, I haven't had anybody royally freak out at me in a couple of years. And I think part of it is I probably have gotten better in my delivery. Also, I probably have PTSD from the times that people had PTSD yelling at me.
Yeah.
So now I probably tiptoe around the conversation a little bit more gently because of my own PTSD induced by their PTSD. But yeah, it's just, and also like, I don't know, I think that there's a good chunk of the healing that could come from us acknowledging that we don't have all of our ducks in a row. At least, I don't know about you guys. You can pretend that you do. But I'm still managing my stuff. I'm still, taking steps to improve my microbiome. I'm still working on my mental health. I mean, I started painting because of stress, because I was so stressed at the beginning of COVID. That was like the straw that tipped the straw that tipped the camel's back. We're going to go with that. That's the new one now. But that was the last straw, and I started losing a whole ton of my hair in the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
And that was like my wake-up call as somebody who's denied stress and shoved it down deep for a lot of years. COVID was like the tipping point for me where I was like, I can't deny it anymore. I'm more stressed than I think I let on, even to myself. And one thing I realized was, girl, you don't have any hobbies. None. Zilch. You need a hobby, and I picked painting.
Yeah, I think plant stores and craft stores have like seen market highs in sales since COVID started, because that's like, all of the really calming activities that you can do, I think are like what everyone's being drawn to right now, because we just need to like sub out of like this like high stress constantly on, even if you don't think you are, like, environment that's been COVID, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
The never-ending COVID.
Never ending. Well, from the beginning, I'll leave you guys with this, since we're done with the scholarly discussion, probably. At the beginning of the pandemic, I started reciting a quote from a very wise philosopher, and I think it really encompasses the entirety of the COVID pandemic and these last couple of years. And I'll share these wisdom words with you, and you can quote it. You could quote the philosopher. The quote goes, "This shit is bananas. BANANAS." Gwen Stefani. I swear to God, like, that song has been on repeat for like 2 years. Just, this shit is bananas. BANANAS. This shit, and it's on a loop in my brain ever since the COVID thing started. And I don't think it's going to get out of my brain until we're actually out of the woods with everything, and everything's completely back to normal. And I can finally go to Japan like I've wanted to for so long. But I think they still haven't opened their borders yet. So I'm waiting.
You'll get there. You'll get there, girl.
I'll get there.
But I like that quote.
But anyway. Thank you.
Yeah.
Were you really believing me? Were you like, oh, there's like
I was waiting for you to drop
quote?
some like solid,
right.
Yeah.
I was ready for you to like quote some Rumi or something. Some sort of...
Nope. Gwen Stefani.
Oh my God. Well, that's probably better.
And again, it encapsulates this whole 2 years, hasn't it?
It does. It really does.
She was right.
Oh my gosh.
She predicted it.
It's too funny.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, it was an absolute pleasure. Guys, if for those of you who are listening to the end, I know we talked for quite a long time. And thank you, Tayler, for staying on with us for so long. And I'm so glad we got to talk to you for as long as we did. But guys, definitely check out Tayler on Instagram. Her handle is Celiac Dietitian. Again, no periods, no dashes, no nothing. It's straightforward. And I think I follow her. So if you go to my Instagram and click on the people I follow, I think you could find her that way too. But my Instagram handle is Triangle Guts, because I'm in the Triangle of North Carolina. Amy, you are Amy_Hollandcamp _RD, right? There's another underscore?
Correct.
I cyberstalk you too, Amy, so.
Well,
truthfully, I have it memorized.
Yes.
I try to come off cool, like I'm not obsessed with you, but truthfully, like, I have everything memorized in my brain.
I like it.
All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much. And as always, we will see you in the next episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. You know where to find us. And as always, if you have comments, leave them down below in the YouTube video, and we will get to those comments eventually. Bye.